The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal was really busy the first week of 2026. That week, the Ninth Circuit weighed in on the Top Gun copyright lawsuit, affirming Paramount's victory. And while the outcome may not surprise anyone who followed the district court's ruling and our coverage of that case, the appellate court's reasoning offers important guidance on substantial similarity, protected expression, and why historical facts, even those facts that could be considered dramatic or have some dramatic flair, remain free for all to use. I'm Scott Hervey, a partner at the law firm of Weintraub Tobin, and I'm joined today by my partner and frequent contributor to the briefing, Tara Sattler. We are going to break down the Ninth Circuit's decision and what it means for studios, writers, and anyone adapting real-world stories on today's installment of the briefing. Tara, welcome back to the briefing.
Hi, Scott. Always great to be here.
Always happy to have you here. All right, why don't we start with where this case came from? So in May of 1983, California Magazine published the article Top Guns by Ehud Yonah. This article was an inside look at the real naval fighter weapons school, Top Gun, based out of Miramar, California. The article begins with a vivid depiction of two Top Gun F-14 Tomcat aviators, Yogi and Possum. I wonder if aviators ever called like Joe or Tom. Like, why do they? Anyways, on a hop, a simulated dogfight training session against the Top Gun instructor. And then it continues, the article continues with a deep dive into what makes those fighter pilots tick, a look at the Top Gun training regimen, what life on base is like, and a history of Top Gun. When the article was published, it was optioned by Paramount, and in the credits for the first Top Gun movie, Yonah is credited as the writer of the magazine article.
I think they've gotta have some fun with it. They can't just be called Joe or Bob. What fun?
Oh, yeah, I think so.
So back to the case. On January 23rd of 2018, the Yonah sent Paramount a statutory notice of termination under the Copyright Act and then filed it with the Copyright Office. And the Yonahs then sued Paramount for copyright infringement, claiming that the Top Gun Maverick infringes the Yonah's right in the original article. At the district court level, Paramount won on summary judgment. The court held that Top Gun Maverick was not substantially similar to the protectable expression in the Top Gun article. The Yonah heirs appealed, and now the Ninth Circuit has affirmed that ruling.
Right.
And I guess I should say the Top Gun Maverick is the second Top Gun movie.
Does anybody listening to this podcast not know what Top Gun Maverick is? I would be really surprised, but okay. Yes, thank you. Top Gun Maverick is the sequel to Top Gun. Okay, so the Ninth Circuit framed the case succinctly, explaining that while the article and the film do share some similarities because they both depict the Navy's real fighter pilot training program, that alone is not enough. As the court put it, copyright plaintiffs must show more than an allegedly infringing work's general similarity to their own. They must show that what is similar is their original expression. So let's talk about the Ninth Circuit's framework, or the framework that was applied in the analysis of this case. So in order to state a claim for infringement, a plaintiff must show substantial similarity between the work's protected elements. Determining whether works are substantially similar involves a two-part analysis consisting of the extrinsic test and the intrinsic test. The extrinsic test assesses the objective similarities of the two works, focusing only on the protectable elements of the plaintiff's expression, whereas the intrinsic test examines an ordinary person's subjective impressions. Although a plaintiff must prove both to establish substantial similarity, a finding of substantial similarity under the extrinsic component is necessary in order for the intrinsic component to be considered. That's because the intrinsic component is reserved for the jury, and usually the extrinsic test is applied by a trier, the court. So this is the objective analytical side of the inquiry, the extrinsic test, where a court will filter out unprotectable elements, so facts, ideas, sans affaire, and then compare only the protectable expressions that remain. And from the outset, the Ninth Circuit emphasized something really critical. Yone's article was a work of nonfiction.
Yeah, and that matters because copyright protection for nonfiction works is inherently thinner. You don't get a monopoly over historical facts or real people or actual events, no matter how compelling or cinematic they might be. The court repeatedly returned to this principle in rejecting the Yone's arguments.
Right. So the heirs argued that Maverick, the sequel, copied a number of elements from the article: elite fighter pilots, risky training exercises, bravado, competitive dynamics among pilots, and the culture of the Navy fighter weapons school. But the Ninth Circuit methodically filtered those elements out.
Exactly. The court characterized those features as either historical facts or sons of fair, stock elements that naturally flow from the subject matter of naval aviation and elite fighter pilots. Once those elements are removed, there's very little left to compare.
Right. The court said, quote, "We observe a problem that pervades the Yone's arguments. Although the article contains much original protected expression, most notably its vivid phrasing and innovative structure, none of that expression appears in Maverick. Yones identify similarities between the article and the film only by describing both works at such a high level of abstraction that the similarities do not involve the protected expression. Their claim of substantial similarity fails because what is protected is not similar, and what is similar is not protected." End quote. So, after filtering out the unprotectable facts, what was left, the actual expressive choices Yone made in writing his article, simply wasn't reflected in Top Gun Maverick.
And the panel was very clear that this case fails the extrinsic test. The court said, and I quote, "Because Maverick does not share substantial amounts of the original expression of Top Gun's, the article, we affirm the district court's grant of summary judgment for Paramount." One argument the heirs pushed hard was that even if individual elements weren't protected, the selection and arrangement of those elements were protected. But the Ninth Circuit was not persuaded.
Right. You can have, if we remember the phone book case, right? You can have unprotectable elements arranged in a unique and creative manner such that it's the arrangement of those elements that is protected, but not the underlying unprotectable facts themselves. And the court explained that the alleged similarities weren't arranged in a sufficiently original or unique way in the article to warrant protection. So basically saying the arrangement itself was not original or unique. And also, in any event, Maverick doesn't replicate that structure. One of the things the Ninth Circuit did very methodically, in its opinion, was to walk through each category of allegedly similar protected expression: plot, characters, dialogue, themes, and so on, and explain why none of them support a finding of substantial similarity. So why don't we kind of talk about those? So let's start with plot and sequence of events. The court was pretty blunt here. It questioned whether Yone's article even had a plot in the traditional sense.
Right. The article is nonfiction. It's episodic, nonlinear, and constantly interrupted by historical and technical digressions. It's journalism, not a three-story act.
Right. And by contrast, Top Gun Maverick is a fully fictional narrative with a chronological structure, a very clear beginning, middle, and end, and a specific mission that drives the entire film.
And the court emphasized that Maverick includes major plot elements that simply don't exist in the article. Things like the uranium enrichment mission, the Maverick Rooster conflict, the romantic subplot, and the extended combat finale.
Right. So even though both works involve elite fighter pilots and training, the court said those similarities are factual and inevitable when you are depicting a real military program, and it's not protected expression.
And the same analysis really carried over to characters too. None of the characters from the article appear in Maverick, and more importantly, the people described in the article were real people.
Right. And this triggers a very clear rule in the Ninth Circuit. A character based on a historical figure is not protected for copyright purposes.
The plaintiffs tried to argue that the film copied expressive traits, confidence, bravado, competitiveness, but the court said those are generalized characteristics, not protectable expression.
Right. And frankly, like those traits are exactly what you'd expect in any depiction of Navy fighter pilots. You can't copyright that. All right, let's talk about dialogue. So dialogue was another category where the plaintiffs just couldn't get traction.
Yeah, the court actually questioned whether any of the article's dialogue was protectable at all, since it was presented as factual reporting on what real pilots actually said.
Right. And even assuming some dialogue could be protected, the court found that none of it appears in Maverick, except for the phrase fights on, which is a real world aviation jargon.
So there was no meaningful overlap in dialogue, protected or otherwise.
Next up were the themes. The plaintiffs identified themes like redemption, sacrifice, brotherhood, and the dangers of aviation.
And the court rejected all of that as classic examples of unprotectable ideas. Themes at that level of generality simply are not protected by copyright.
Right. The court essentially said that allowing protection here would give one author ownership over a concept, right? A concept that is pretty ubiquitous in certain types of genres, uh, and a concept that really belongs in the public domain.
And they made similar arguments about mood, nostalgia, romanticism, intensity.
Right. But the court explained that a mood alone isn't independently protectable, and any shared mood here flows naturally from the subject matter of fighter aviation.
In other words, if you make a movie about fighter pilots, it's going to feel intense and nostalgic. That doesn't make it infringing.
Right. And on the setting, the plaintiffs pointed out that both works take place in San Diego and at a naval airbase.
But again, those are real locations tied to a real program. The court treated that as factual reality, not creative expression.
Right. And it even noted that the actual bases depicted weren't the same, though that really didn't matter because geography isn't protected under copyright anyways.
So finally, there was pace. The plaintiffs argued that both works alternate between intense fight sequences and quieter moments on the ground.
And the court rejected that too, explaining that this pacing reflects how real pilots training actually works. It's dictated by the subject matter, not original creative choices. I also might point out that the court didn't say this, but like that's how movies work too. There's action and then quiet moments. Like it's right. It's a standard movie making tool. So
Exactly.
can you imagine one author having a monopoly over that? Like you either have to go like all intense or all quiet. You can't go intense, quiet, intense, quiet.
And no one would watch the movie.
Right.
It'd either be boring or give you a heart attack.
Right. So when you put it all together, the Ninth Circuit concluded that there was no meaningful similarities in the protected expression, only shared facts, ideas, and genre conventions.
And because the plaintiffs failed the extrinsic test, the court never even needed to reach the intrinsic test. Summary judgment was appropriate as a matter of law. This is an important reminder that selection and arrangement is not a magic phrase. You still need originality and you still need copying of that originality to be copyright infringement.
Let's talk about what this case kind of stands for.
This case isn't a sweeping new doctrine or a major expansion of fair use or copyright defenses. To me, it seems to be a very methodical application of the extrinsic test.
No, I agree with you. That's exactly right. There's nothing new here. The court didn't need to reach fair use. It didn't need to address termination rights in detail. It resolved the case on the cleanest possible grounds. No substantial similarity as a matter of law. All right, so let's talk about the takeaways here. First, nonfiction works, especially journalistic ones, receive narrow protection. Studios can draw from real world stories so long as they avoid copying the author's expressive choices.
And second, courts will rigorously apply filtering at the extrinsic stage. Plaintiffs can't rely on generalized similarities, themes, or vibes, especially in genres where certain elements are unavoidable.
I think that's probably the most important takeaway, Tara. Um, and when it comes to plaintiffs who are bringing a cause of action for copyright infringement, you better be granular when you're describing the protectable elements that are shared. All right. Third, this decision reinforces the importance of summary judgment in copyright cases. When the similarities reside entirely in unprotectable material, courts are increasingly willing to resolve these cases, and as they should, without sending them to the jury.
This case, I don't think, is just about Top Gun. The influence of this case will be felt in future cases involving biopics, historical dramas, and adaptations loosely inspired by real people or events.
Right, absolutely. I agree with you. For anyone adapting a true story, whether in film, television, streaming, the Ninth Circuit has reaffirmed the core principle: copyright protects expression, not facts or reality. Well, Tara, thanks again for joining me on the briefing. Always great to have your insights. And thank you, our listeners, for joining us on the briefing today. If you found this episode helpful or interesting, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and share it with your network. We'd also love to hear from you. So leave us a comment or a review and let us know what topics you would like us to cover in future episodes. I'm Scott Hervey. I'll see you next time on the briefing.